The cold of the stone floor seeped through the thin soles of Alara's worn boots, a familiar ache that climbed from her bad leg and settled deep in her hip. It was a constant companion, that pain, more loyal than any person had ever been. She was a daughter of the fallen Blackwood pack, sent as a living tribute, a pretty word for a hostage, to the court of the Alpha King Theron. A punishment for her father's failed rebellion. Here, she was less than a ghost, a servant with a limp, easily ignored, easily dismissed. Every day was a study in grays, gray stone walls that wept with condensation, gray watery stew in the servants' hall, gray skies that pressed down on the fortress like a lid on a tomb. The castle itself felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Whispers followed her like rats skittering in the walls. They were not about her, not really. They were about him. The king. King Theron, the Wolf of the North, a man whose name was a blade. They said he was dying. She saw him only in glimpses, a towering figure crossing a courtyard, his black cloak billowing behind him like smoke. A hard profile in a high window, staring out at the desolate mountains. He was beautiful in the way a winter storm was beautiful, all power and merciless cold. But she saw the truth in the tremor of a hand he quickly hid in his cloak, the flicker of exhaustion in his eyes that was too profound for a man so young. The whispers were true. The great Alpha King was fading, and his slow decay was a sickness infecting the very stones of his kingdom. Her life was a rotation of menial tasks designed for humiliation. Polishing floors she could see her own gaunt face in, hauling water that made her shoulders scream, sorting herbs in the kitchens until her fingers were stained and numb. Her limp, a remnant of a childhood break that had been set badly, made every task a trial. It was a visible mark of her imperfection, a constant reminder to everyone, and to herself, that she was broken. One evening, while carrying a basket of laundry through a lesser-used corridor, she felt it. A presence. The air grew heavy, charged with a primal energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She turned, her heart hammering against her ribs, and saw him. Not the king, but his wolf. It was a creature of nightmare and legend. A beast the size of a pony, with fur the color of midnight and eyes like chips of amber. This was the other half of the Alpha King, the raw, untamed power of his bloodline. It stood silently at the far end of the hall, simply watching her. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her. Pack law was simple. A wolf of his stature could tear out her throat for looking at it wrong, and no one would blink. She dropped her gaze to the floor, her knuckles white on the basket handle, and waited for the end. She made herself small, insignificant prey. But the attack never came. When she dared to look up again, the great wolf had taken a few steps closer. It was not snarling. Its posture was not aggressive. It was curious. It tilted its massive head, its amber eyes fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. It was looking at her, seeing her, in a way the king never had, in a way no one ever had. Section 1. It started then. The haunting. The wolf was always there. When she scrubbed the flagstones of the great hall, she would feel its gaze from the shadows of the throne. When she worked in the gardens, it would lie silently on the wall, a dark statue against the gray sky. It never approached, never threatened. It simply watched. The court began to notice. The whispers changed. They became about her. The broken girl. The cripple from Blackwood. What does the king's beast want with her? Their fear of the wolf was transferred to her. A new layer of isolation that wrapped around her like a shroud. She was no longer just worthless. She was an ill omen. A week into the silent haunting, the wolf changed its tactics. As she limped toward the kitchens, it appeared before her, blocking the corridor. It was so close now she could smell the scent of pine and cold stone clinging to its fur. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. It didn't growl. It huffed, a soft sound, and then turned its head, nudging her gently with its massive snout. Not toward the kitchens, but in the opposite direction, toward the royal wing. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can't go there." The wolf huffed again, more insistently this time, and took a step toward her. She took a step back. It was a slow, terrifying dance down the length of the hall. The wolf herding her, pushing her away from her duties and toward the one place she was forbidden to go. Her back hit a heavy oak door, a dead end. The wolf stopped a few feet from her, its gaze unwavering. Then it did something that shattered her fear into 1,000 pieces of confusion. It sat. It lay its head on its paws, looked at her, and gave a soft, low whine. It was not a sound of aggression. It sounded like pleading. Her hand trembled as she reached for the door handle behind her. Her fingers brushed against cold, ornate iron. She glanced at the door, then back at the wolf. Its amber eyes were fixed on the wood. It wanted her to go inside. With a sense of dawning horror, she recognized the carvings on the door. A cradle, a rocking horse, a family of wolves howling at a smiling moon. This was the royal nursery. It had been sealed for decades, ever since the plague that had stolen King Theron's infant siblings and left him the sole, haunted survivor of his line. The wolf whined again, a sound of deep, aching need. It wanted her in there, and it would not move until she was. The confrontation she had dreaded came like a storm breaking. King Theron found her there, cornered by his own beast outside the sealed nursery. He didn't stride. He stalked into the hall, his face a mask of thunderous fury. His guards followed, their spears held ready, their fear a palpable stench in the air. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice was not loud, but it was deep and resonant, a sound that vibrated in her bones. It was a voice accustomed to absolute obedience. She couldn't speak. She could only press herself back against the nursery door, her heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. Theron's eyes, the same unnerving amber as his wolf's, flickered from her to the beast. The great wolf did not cower. It rose to its feet and stood between Elara and the king, a low growl rumbling in its chest. It was protecting her. From him. The shock of it rippled through the guards, the king's own wolf defying the king, for a crippled servant girl. "Move!" Theron commanded his other half. The word was clipped, sharp as flint. The wolf growled louder, its gaze locked with the king's. A silent, furious battle of wills was being waged in the cold stone corridor. Elara was trapped in the middle of it, the terrified prize in a war she didn't understand. Finally, Theron's eyes snapped to her. The cold fury in them was so intense, it felt like a physical blow. "You!" he snarled. "What witchcraft is this? Were you sent by my enemies to drive a wedge between me and my own soul? Is this some blackwood poison?" "No," she whispered, finding her voice at last. It was a pathetic, reedy sound. "I did nothing. It followed me." "It has never followed anyone," he shot back. His gaze swept over her, taking in her patched dress, her worn boots, her useless leg. It was a look of pure contempt. He saw her as everyone else did, weak, broken, inconsequential. A tool. "It has been confined to the kennels since this madness began. It broke a stone wall to get out, to find you." The knowledge that the beast had smashed through stone to reach her sent a fresh wave of terror through her. This was more than a strange fixation. This was an obsession. "I don't know why," she insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of strength from sheer desperation. "I swear it." "You will be moved to the tower," he declared, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Where I can watch you. Where we can watch you. If you are a spy, I will find out. If you are a witch, I will see you burn." He turned to leave, a dismissal as absolute as an execution. But his wolf moved, blocking his path this time. It nudged the king's hand, then looked back at Alara, and then pointedly at the nursery door. The message was unmistakable. Theron's jaw tightened. A muscle pulsed in his cheek. He was the most powerful man in the north, and he was being controlled by the instincts of his own wolf, all because of her. The humiliation was a poison in his expression. He turned back to her, his eyes burning with a cold, hateful fire. "You will stay by my side until I have an answer for this madness. You will eat when I eat, walk where I walk. You will not be out of my sight for a single moment. Do you understand?" She understood. She was no longer a servant. She was a prisoner, shackled to a dying king by the inexplicable obsession of his wolf. And so began their strange, hostile dance. Alara was moved from the squalor of the servants' quarters to a small, cold chamber adjoining the king's own. It was a cage with better furnishings. Theron was true to his word. She was never out of his sight. She stood in the corner of the council room while he debated matters of state, her leg throbbing from the hours of standing. She sat at the far end of his table during his solitary meals, the silence between them as thick and heavy as iron. His wolf was always there, a silent shadow, lying between them as if guarding them both. They were genuine adversaries, trapped in a proximity that pleased no one but the beast. He was convinced she was an enemy agent. His words were sharp, his questions relentless. He interrogated her about her family, her pack, her past, searching for the hint of a plot. "Your father was a traitor," he stated one evening, his voice flat as he pushed a piece of meat around his plate. "He thought me weak. He was wrong." "He was a fool," Alara replied, her own voice quiet but firm. She would not defend the man who had traded her life for his own ambition. He mistook desperation for weakness, a common mistake. Theron's head snapped up, his amber eyes narrowed. He was not used to being analyzed, especially not by someone he considered beneath his notice. "And what do you see when you look at me?" She held his gaze, her fear for once eclipsed by a spark of defiance. "I see a man who is afraid of his own shadow." The rage that flashed in his eyes was swift and terrifying. He half rose from his chair, a snarl twisting his lips. But it passed as quickly as it came, replaced by that deep, chilling weariness. He sank back down, a shudder racking his powerful frame. He hid it quickly, but she saw it. She saw everything now that she was so close. She saw the way his hand shook when he thought no one was looking, the fine sheen of sweat on his brow despite the cold, the way he would sometimes close his eyes for a moment too long, as if the effort of staying upright was almost too much to bear. The dying king was no longer a whisper. He was a reality she lived with every day. He saw her too. He saw the way she bit her lip to stifle a gasp of pain when she had to walk too far. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw as she refused to ask for help. He saw her kindness to the kitchen boy who dropped a tray, a gentleness she never showed him. He was watching her, not just for treachery, but with a reluctant, grudging curiosity. One night, the inevitable happened. She was woken from a shallow sleep by a heavy thud from his chambers. Silence followed. A deep, unnatural silence. Her heart pounded. She could leave, walk away, let the tyrant die alone. It would be justice. But the thought of him lying cold on the stone floor, it twisted something inside her. Limping, she pushed open the heavy door connecting their rooms. Theron lay on the floor near his desk, his body convulsing. His skin was pale, slick with a deathly sweat. His breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. The great Alpha King was helpless, brought low by the sickness that was eating him from the inside out. She didn't think. She acted. She rushed to his side, kneeling on the cold floor. She grabbed a heavy fur from his bed and covered him, trying to warm a body that was radiating a terrifying chill. "Help!" she rasped, looking toward the door, but her voice was a useless whisper. No one would come. No one was allowed this close to the king at night. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glazed with pain. He looked at her, but he didn't see her. He was trapped in the fever dream of his own decay. "It's so cold," he muttered, his teeth chattering. Without a second thought, she lay down beside him, pulling the furs over them both, trying to share her own meager warmth. She held his head, stroking his damp hair back from his forehead. It was a strangely intimate gesture, an act of comfort for her sworn enemy. His convulsions slowly subsided, but the chill remained. He was shivering violently, his powerful body trembling like a leaf. In his delirium, he turned toward her, seeking the source of the warmth. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his breath a hot, desperate puff against her skin. And then, his lips found hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was born of fever and desperation, a drowning man's grasp for air. It was clumsy and hard and utterly consuming. For a heartbeat, she was frozen in shock. Then, something inside her answered him. A spark ignited deep within her soul, a dormant, forgotten thing. A jolt, like lightning, shot through them both. She felt it, a surge of warmth, of life, flowing out of her and into him. It was a torrent, a river of energy she didn't know she possessed. She felt his shivering stop. She felt the unnatural cold in his skin recede, replaced by a surge of living heat. He pulled back, his eyes flying open. They were clear. The fever was gone. He stared at her, his face inches from hers, his expression one of pure, unadulterated shock. He had felt it too, the raw, untamed power that had passed between them. He scrambled away from her as if he'd been burned, pressing himself against the leg of the desk. He looked at his own hands, then back at her, his face a maelstrom of confusion, fear, and something else she couldn't name. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I—" She had no answer. She felt drained, hollowed out, but also strangely alive. "I don't know." The wolf, which had been a silent observer from the corner, rose and padded over to her, nudging her hand with its nose in a gesture of clear approval. It finally made sense. The wolf hadn't been obsessed with her. It had been obsessed with what was inside her. The kiss changed everything. The animosity between them didn't vanish, but it was now laced with a new, terrifying current of awareness. They were connected in a way neither of them understood. The air between them crackled with unspoken questions. Theron no longer treated her like a spy. He treated her like a puzzle he was desperate to solve. He watched her constantly, his gaze intense, searching. He was still a king, still hard and commanding, but the raw contempt was gone, replaced by a wary, almost fearful respect. He felt better. The change was subtle at first, but undeniable. The tremor in his hands lessened. The color returned to his face. He could stand for longer, his shoulders straighter. The crushing weight of his illness eased for the first time in years. He felt the spark she had given him, a small pilot light in the vast, cold darkness of his decay. He needed more, but he wouldn't ask. His pride was a fortress. To admit he needed her, a crippled girl from a trader's line, was a weakness he could not afford. Ilara felt the change too. A strange energy now hummed beneath her skin. Her chronic pain hadn't vanished, but it was muted, a dull ache where there had once been a searing fire. Something had woken up inside her. Her power, whatever it was a bond amplifier. It took the connection between them, the faint, nascent mate bond, and magnified it, turning it into a conduit. Their fragile, unspoken truce was shattered by the arrival of Lady Seraphina. She swept into the court like a perfumed viper, all silks and smiles and hidden venom. She had been Theron's betrothed years ago, a political match that had dissolved when it became clear the sacred mate bond would never form between them. She had never forgiven him for the public rejection. Her eyes, the color of winter frost, landed on Alara, who was standing in her usual place near the throne. Seraphina's smile tightened. "My king," she said, her voice like honey laced with glass. "You look improved. I had heard such worrying rumors." Her gaze flickered back to Alara. "Perhaps you have found a new court physician?" Theron's face was unreadable. "Lady Seraphina, your visit is unexpected." "I came as soon as I heard of your miraculous recovery," she purred, walking closer. She saw the wolf lying at Alara's feet, its head resting near her boot. Seraphina's eyes narrowed. "And I see you have acquired a new pet. How quaint." Seraphina was clever. She saw the dynamic immediately: the king's improved health, the wolf's devotion, the crippled girl at the center of it all. And she saw her chance. Over the next few days, she worked her poison into the court. She spoke to council members, to guards, to servants, planting seeds of doubt. She was charming, concerned, a trusted friend of the crown. She hinted that a dark magic was at work, that the Blackwood girl was not a healer, but a parasite. Alara felt the shift. The stares were no longer just curious, they were suspicious, hostile. The whispers now had a name for her: the Siphon, the witch. The attack came during a formal court assembly. Seraphina had laid her trap perfectly. She waited until the great hall was filled with every lord and lady of the north. "My king," she began, her voice ringing with false concern. "We are all overjoyed to see your strength returning. But we must ask, at what cost?" She turned and pointed a dramatic, accusing finger at Alara. "This creature has woven a dark spell around you. She is not healing you. She is draining you." A gasp went through the hall. Theron's hand went to the hilt of his sword. "Be careful, Seraphina. You are speaking of my—" He hesitated, not knowing what to call her. Seraphina seized on his hesitation. "Your what? Your prisoner? Your pet? I will tell you what she is. She is a vessel for a great evil, a witch who is feeding on your life force to nurture her own foul creation." She motioned to the doors, and the court healer, a man Alara recognized as one of Seraphina's cronies, stepped forward. "Your Majesty," the healer said, bowing low. "Lady Seraphina asked me to examine the girl. I have found a grave truth. She carries a child." The words hit Alara like a physical blow. Pregnant? It was impossible. And yet, the strange exhaustion, the recent bouts of nausea she had dismissed as part of her awakening power. It was true. The realization dawned on her with a dizzying, terrifying certainty. The child was Theron's, conceived in the fever and desperation of that one, single kiss, a magical, impossible conception. The hall erupted in chaos. "A bastard!" someone shouted. Seraphina's voice cut through the noise, sharp and triumphant. "A bastard conceived in darkness. She is siphoning your royal blood, your very life, into that thing. She means to see you dead and place her spawn on the throne. It is the final revenge of the Blackwood traitors." It was a brilliant, venomous lie, plausible enough to a court terrified of their king's weakness and desperate for an enemy to blame. "Seize her!" a council lord bellowed. Theron roared, a sound of pure alpha fury that shook the rafters. "No one will touch her." His wolf sprang to its feet, a monstrous, snarling guardian at Alara's side. But the poison had done its work. The council, the lords, even his own guards looked at him with fearful, suspicious eyes. They saw a king enchanted, bewitched, no longer in his right mind. "For his own good," Seraphina whispered to the captain of the guard, "before she drains him completely." The guards advanced, a wall of steel and fear. Theron and his wolf stood ready to fight, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. To fight his own council would be to start a civil war, to shatter a kingdom already on the brink. His strength was returning, but it was not absolute. He was still weak, still vulnerable. He looked at Alara, his eyes filled with a terrible, desperate conflict. He was trapped. "Take her," the head councilman ordered, his voice heavy with regret. "To the dungeons. We will hold a trial." Seraphina smiled. She had won. The dungeon was colder than the stone floors above, a deep, damp cold that settled in Alara's bones and refused to leave. They had put her in the deepest cell, a place of utter darkness and despair. The trial was a formality. She knew she was going to die. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach. A child. His child. The wolf had known. That was the secret it had been guarding. It hadn't just been drawn to her power. It had heard the heartbeat of the future. The pup. The heir that would save their line. The nursery. It had all been for the child. A wave of grief and protective fury washed over her. They could kill her, but they would not have her baby. Days bled into one another. They gave her bread and water, just enough to keep her alive for her execution. She was alone with her fear and the tiny secret life inside her. She felt the mate bond, stretched thin and taut like a wire about to snap. She could feel Theron's anguish, his rage, his helplessness. He was fighting for her, she knew, but Seraphina had outmaneuvered him completely. The council had declared him unfit, placing him under what amounted to house arrest in his own chambers. On the 5th day, the cell door creaked open. It was not the guard. It was Seraphina. She glided into the darkness, holding a lantern that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. She looked radiant, triumphant. "It's a shame, really," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You almost had him. A crippled, worthless nobody. You should be proud." Alara didn't answer. She huddled on the straw pallet, saving her strength. "The council has decided," Seraphina continued, circling the cell like a predator. "You will be executed at dawn, a witch's pyre. Poetic, don't you think? But I thought that was too messy and too slow." She produced a small, dark vial from her sleeve. "This is quicker. A gift. From me to you." It was poison, a clean death she was offering, a way to avoid the flames. "Why?" Alara's voice was a croak. "Because I want to watch the light go out in your eyes," Seraphina hissed, her mask of civility finally dropping. "I want to know that I was the one who personally snuffed out his last pathetic hope. When you die, the bond will shatter. What's left of his life will drain away in hours. By sunset tomorrow, I will be advising the new regent." Footsteps echoed in the corridor. Heavy, running footsteps. Shouts. The clang of steel on steel. Seraphina's head snapped toward the door, her eyes wide with alarm. "Impossible." The cell door burst open, ripped from its very hinges. Theron stood there, breathing heavily, his sword dripping with blood. His eyes were blazing with a fire Alara had never seen before. He was no longer a dying king. He was a god of wrath. But she could see the cost. A dark network of veins pulsed on his skin, a sign that he was burning through his own life force to fuel this last desperate act. He saw the vial in Seraphina's hand. He saw the intent in her eyes. He launched himself forward, but he was too far. Seraphina was faster. With a snarl of fury, she lunged at Alara and forced the vial to her lips, splashing the dark liquid into her mouth. Alara choked, swallowing the bitter poison before she could stop it. "Too late!" Seraphina shrieked with triumphant laughter as Theron's hands closed around her throat. A burning, icy fire spread through Alara's veins. Her vision blurred. The world tilted, dissolving into darkness. She felt Theron's arms catch her as she fell. He was shouting her name. He held her, cradling her against his chest on the filthy dungeon floor. Tears streamed down his face, the first she had ever seen him shed. He was looking at her as if she were the entire world and it was ending. "Ilara," he choked out, his voice broken. "Don't leave me, please. I love you." The words, spoken in the depths of despair, at the very edge of death, were a key. They unlocked everything. The poison was killing her. She could feel her life slipping away, her body growing cold. She had two choices: cling to life and let the poison win, or let go. She thought of the child. She thought of him. His broken, desperate confession of love. "I will not let you die," she thought. Not to herself, but to him, through the bond. I will not let her win. She made a choice. She accepted death. She willingly let go of her own life, not in surrender, but as a sacrifice. She gathered every last spark of her being, her life force, her soul, and pushed it all into the bond. A final, desperate gift to him and their child. It was the trigger. The moment she let go, her power erupted. It was not the small spark from the kiss. It was a supernova. A tidal wave of pure golden light exploded from her body. It was the light of creation, the very essence of life itself. The light surged through her, burning the poison from her veins, knitting her cells back together, healing the old, deep damage in her leg until the bone was straight and true. It blasted outwards, slamming into Theron. He cried out as the golden energy hit him. It was not an energy of destruction, but of restoration. He felt the ancient curse that had clung to his bloodline for generations shatter like glass. He felt the sickness, the decay, the coldness, burn away into nothing. His own power, dormant and fading for so long, roared back to life, amplified, magnified, purified by her gift. He was not just healed, he was remade. The golden light flooded the dungeon, poured up the stairs, and washed over the entire castle. Every wolf in the kingdom felt it, the restoration of their alpha, the arrival of their queen. When the light faded, Ilara took a deep, shuddering breath. She was alive. More than alive, she was whole. She pushed herself up, her body feeling strong, balanced. The pain in her leg was gone. Completely. Theron was staring at her, his face filled with awe and reverence. The dark veins were gone. His eyes were clear and bright, blazing with life and power and a love so fierce it stole her breath. He reached out, his hand trembling, and cupped her cheek. He whispered. "I know," she said, her voice clear and strong. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, burying his face in her hair. They clung to each other, two halves of a soul finally made one, while the terrified, defeated form of Seraphina lay crumpled in the corner, and the entire castle guard stood frozen in the corridor, witnesses to a miracle. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her from the darkness of the dungeon up into the light. He didn't stop until he reached the great hall, where the entire court was gathered, their faces a mixture of fear and wonder. He walked to the throne and gently set her down on it. He then knelt before her in front of everyone, bowing his head. "My mate," he said, his voice ringing with power and conviction. "My queen." Weeks later, the Northern Kingdom felt like a different world. The oppressive gray had lifted, replaced by a sense of hope and renewal. The land itself seemed to be healing along with its king. Under the combined strength of their alpha and his newfound queen, the pack was thriving. Ilara stood by the window in the royal chambers, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach. The morning sun streamed in, warming her face. The castle no longer felt like a prison, but a home. Her home. Theron came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. He was a different man. The cold, harsh edges had been softened by a deep, abiding warmth that was reserved only for her. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a peaceful contentment she never thought she would see. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his lips brushing against her temple. "Seraphina," she admitted. He had not killed his former betrothed. Instead, he had stripped her of her title and power and exiled her to a barren convent on the frozen coast, a fate she would find far crueler than a quick death. Justice had been served. "Don't," he said softly. "She is a ghost, a memory. Don't let her shadow touch what we have." He was right. Alara turned in his arms, her gaze falling upon the open door across the hall. The door to the nursery. It was no longer sealed. The heavy oak had been cleaned and polished, the carvings seeming to shine with new life. Inside, the room had been transformed. Fresh paint, new tapestries, and in the center of the room, a beautifully carved wooden cradle. Together, they walked into the room. It was filled with light and warmth, a place of hope and happy endings. Theron's massive wolf, the beast who had started it all, was already there. He was no longer a restless, haunted guardian. He lay peacefully on a soft rug beside the cradle, his tail giving a gentle thump against the floor when he saw them. He was content. His long vigil was over. Ilara ran her hand over the smooth wood of the cradle. It was real. All of it. The pain and the fear, the love and the sacrifice. It had all led them here. "He knew," she whispered, looking at the wolf. "All this time. He heard our son's heartbeat before I even knew he existed." "He heard the future," Theron corrected gently. He placed his hand over hers on her stomach, his touch warm and sure. "He heard our future." She leaned against him, her head resting on his chest, and felt the steady, powerful beat of his heart. She was no longer the broken girl, the crippled servant. She was a queen, a mate, a mother-to-be. She had found her place, not just in the world, but in his heart. The world had tried to discard her, to break her, but in the end, her perceived weakness had been the source of her greatest strength. She had not been rescued by a king, she had saved him, and in doing so, had saved herself. They stood there for a long time, bathed in the sunlight of the nursery. A king, his queen, and the silent, faithful wolf who had known all along that the hope for their entire world lay hidden in the heart of a broken girl.